All right. So we are about halfway through the semester. We've made it through a fair amount of content, looked at a bunch of tools. What we're going to do in this week is really just focus on a few more tools, just to make sure we're familiar with all of the modeling tools that we have access to. So this week, I think I'm going to do a little different. I'm just going to make a video for each specific tool that we want to talk about, and that way we'll just have access to each of the tools really quickly. And then the project will probably be a little bit simpler of putting things together. But the first thing I want to say, just as kind of a generic review, in that very first project, we used primitive modeling techniques, right? Where we made one object, we scaled it up, and then we added another object to get the details. So one example of this is maybe you want to make a door, right? So a door, pretty simple. You come in, you can say, all right, that looks kind of like a door, but maybe I need a doorknob, right? So how do you make a doorknob? What a primitive modeling would do would be to come in and just add a sphere. Doesn't matter what sphere it is. We'll just add a sphere. We'll bring it to about where the doorknob should be, and we'll scale it way down. Move it out. And you can see pretty quickly you could represent that your door had a doorknob on it, right? You could do a little bit more than that. You could come in and you could put a cylinder in between them. So add another object, add a cylinder, and then move the cylinder up, rotate it. We're not going to go through the whole process here, right? But you get the idea. You could make a doorknob with primitive objects. But problem is, this isn't really modeling, right? This is just dragging and dropping shapes around. More like building with really basic Lego blocks. It's not that fun. It doesn't look that good. So what we need to do is make sure that we're familiar with techniques in order to create a mesh, to modify a single mesh, not to add objects and balance them and put them in the right position, but to actually create a mesh. So we've already looked at, in edit mode, we've looked at the Extrude tool, we've looked at the Inset Faces tool, we haven't looked at the Bevel tool, but we've looked at the Loop Cut. So I'm going to go through just these very specific tools really quickly to make sure that we're familiar with what they do. Whoops. So I'm going to select my face here. And the first one I'm going to look at is Extrude. So when you extrude an object, the default tool that comes up just pulls the object directly out. You could also go ahead and bring up the scale tool. When you hit Extrude, you can scale. Hit Extrude, pull it off, and then when you scale it, right, you get a little bit of detail. But this is effectively doing the same thing that the Inset tool does, right? So normally when you want to pull a face out, you're going to extrude it. And that'll give you more detail to work with. If you want to pull the face into itself and just get some detail that way, then you're going to use the Inset Faces. Right, so they do different things, but both of them... Sorry, let me select all of these around. Both of them add 4 faces in between the face that you have selected and the new face. So we'll represent it again. The Extrude tool, pull it out. I've made 4 new faces. Now the Inset Edge tool, pull it down. And I've made 4 new faces. I can pull it out. And it's really not that different, right? It's a different tool, but it's used for very similar techniques, right? It just depends on how you want to pull your object together. Now, one thing we haven't discussed, those are tools we should be pretty familiar with. Those are things we've discussed before. We've also discussed inserting edge loops. And all this does the same thing, it just adds in more detail. Now, it's not as, what's the right word? It's not as easy maybe necessarily to get the shapes that you want here, but sometimes you just need more faces to work with. And when you do, then edge loops give you that detail. Right, so instead of having a new face and 4 edges around, we have a little bit more detail going into it. And also you'll notice that the shape has changed. Right, so when we started with this door, maybe I'll do it one side with the inset and one side with the extrude. Or one side with the edge loops and one side with the extrude. No, that's not going to work. So we'll go ahead and extrude once. Here, faces. We'll do an extrusion. I'm going to scale it down. And then we'll do an inset. I'm going to scale that down. And then I'm going to come in and add these edge loops. So you'll see like you have similar styles, right? But when you use the edge loops, you don't have elements come up to the corner like you do with the inset or the extrude, right? So it does change the shape of what you're going to get a little bit, but depending on what shape you want, that just depends on what tool you use. So I'm going to go back. I want to show you one more thing, because all of these are about getting more detail, right? Getting more information to work with. The last one I want to talk about right now is the bevel tool. So we start off with a cube, and I'm actually going to delete this cube and just make a new one, because I've done a lot of different things to that one. So we have this cube. I'm going to come in and I'm going to select every single face. So again, you can do that by selecting one face and pressing Control A. And then I'm going to hit the bevel tool. And the bevel tool brings up a tool very similar to the extrude tool. But as you pull it up, you see what it does is it just shaves down every single corner on your object. And when you let go, you can do it again. But the first time you do it, if you do it and let go, it brings up the bevel options. Sometimes the options don't pop up, but they do have a little toolbox down here. You can pop it up and you can tell it I want more segments. Right? You can tell it I want more width. I want to make it bigger. And on all of these, you can usually just click and drag. So now 6 segments, maybe I only want 2 segments or 3 segments. I can change the spacing of it to here. 4 segments. Right, and really quickly you can use that bevel tool to make really cool contours or shapes on the object that you're working with. Again, that's the bevel tool. Primarily what it's used for is not necessarily for making a ball. Usually it's made for something where you have an edge and you just want that edge to be, whoops, hit the wrong button. You want that edge to be beveled or have some contour or concavity to it. You can angle it however you want, right? You get all this detail, you get all these options about ways you can do it. So this is the bevel tool. And again, it's just another way to add detail. This might have been something that was really useful on the treasure chest, right? And this is with one edge. I'm going to go in and repeat it. I'm going to add another cube. And I'm going to go back into edit mode, and I'm going to select 2 edges here, this one and this one. And then I'm already on the bevel tool, and you can see I have my bevel tool right here. And you can do the same thing. Again, this may have been something that was kind of useful on the treasure chest, but you get the idea. Now, the one thing about the bevel tool when you use it is it does not protect the edge contours, right? So now I have this face, and this face, instead of having 4 edges, has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 edges. And we want all of our faces to have just 4 edges, right? So we need to figure out how to come in and actually change the number of faces. And this is not always easy. But a really easy way that I like to do it is just to delete the face. And we've done this before with the fill hole tool, right? I'm just going to start bridging things together. And eventually I have my edge loops intact, kind of just like I want them, right? I could do it differently, but I usually like to just make a hole and then clean it up. And the earlier you do that, the easier it's going to be to clean up. We'll look at other ways as far as sculpting and different ways to add in the edges. Sometimes you can use this knife tool. So if I come in here and I click here, I can kind of just draw my own edge loops, and then I can work with those to help me get quads. So something like that. Now I've got still quads on this side, but it's not as clean. I end up having to do a little bit more work when I do it that way, but sometimes that will get you the quads that you want to work with. And it's a little bit easier sometimes than filling the hole. But this is the first video of the week. We just reviewed the Extrude tool, the Inset Faces tool. We looked at the Bevel tool and the Loop Cut and the Knife tool. And that's pretty much all we have time for. I guess I'll look at one more thing. I'm going to put in an edge loop here. There's a tool down here called Edge Slide. So if I select my edge loop, which again you can do just by double clicking, you can click on the Edge Slide tool, and then you can move that edge loop left or right, and it moves the entire edge loop, which is really cool. It keeps the same distance away from everything. It doesn't distort the edge. It just moves the whole thing, which is cool. So if I were to come in, and let's say I just grabbed a couple of these edges and had them moved, right? So they weren't necessarily exactly in the center like the other ones were. When I select that and I use my Move Edge tool, it moves them all closer to one side or the other. Now obviously they can't go over the side. It stays on the plane. So as you get to the edge, sometimes they do kind of distort, but the general idea is to keep that same shape as you go back and forth, and you can put it wherever you want on the object. So it's a good way to add detail and then find a way to get a little bit more control over where the detail points you're adding is. And that's everything for this video. Next video, we'll look at something different. Thanks.